Does the form a government takes, the way in which it is structured, have any importance? Political scientists, historians, and other social commentators have long argued that question. The English poet Alexander Pope weighed in on this couplet in 1733. For forms of government let fools contest, whatever is best administered is best. Was Pope right? Does it matter what form a government takes? Pope thought not, but you can form your own opinion as you read this section. Classic forms of government. Classic forms of government are those forms that have appeared throughout human history. They include the following. Feudalism, the dominant political system in medieval Europe, is based on the rule of local lords bound to a king by ties of loyalty. A classic republic is a representative democracy in which a small group of elected leaders represent the concerns of the electorate. During the classical era, Greek city-states experimented with this form of government. Rome later followed the Greek example. An absolute monarchy is a form of government in which a king or queen holds total control of the military and the government. Authoritarianism is a form of government in which an individual or group has unlimited authority. No effective restraint on the power of government exists. Despotism is a rule by a despot, a ruler with absolute power who uses his rule tyrannically. Liberal democracy is based on the protection of individual rights and freedoms and on the consent of the governed. A liberal democracy focuses on protecting individual rights from the tyranny of the majority. Totalitarianism is a type of government that attempts to control all facets of citizens' lives. All governments can be classified according to 1. Who can participate in the governing process, 2. The geographical distribution of governmental power within the state, and 3. The relationship between the legislative and the executive branches of the government. To many people, the most meaningful of these classifications is the one that depends on the number of persons who can take part in governing process. Here there are two basic forms to consider: democracies and dictatorships. In a democracy, supreme political authority rests with the people. The people hold the sovereign power, and government is conducted only by and with the consent of the people. Abraham Lincoln gave immortality to this definition of democracy in his Gettysburg Address of 1863, when he said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people." Nowhere is there a better, more concise statement of the American understanding of democracy. A democracy can be either direct or indirect in form. A direct democracy, also called a pure democracy, exists where the will of the people is translated into public policy directly by the people themselves in mass meetings. This can work only in very small communities where it is possible for the citizenry to meet in a central place and where the problems of government are few and relatively simple. Direct democracy does not exist at a national level anywhere in the world today. However, the New England Town Meeting, which you will read about in Chapter 25, and the Landesgemeinden in a few of the smaller Swiss cantons are excellent examples of direct democracy in action. Americans are more familiar with the indirect form of democracy, that is, with representative democracy. In a representative democracy, a small group of persons chosen by the people to act as their representatives expresses the popular will. These agents of the people are responsible for carrying out the day-to-day conduct of government, the making and executing of laws, and so on. They are held accountable to the people for their conduct, especially at periodic elections. At these elections, the people have an opportunity to express their approval or disapproval of their representatives by casting ballots for or against them. To put it another way, representative democracy is government by popular consent, government with the consent of the governed. Some people insist that the United States is more properly called a republic rather than a democracy. They hold that in a republic, the sovereign power is held by those eligible to vote, while the political power is exercised by representatives chosen by and held responsible to those citizens. For them, democracy can be defined only in terms of direct democracy. Many Americans use the terms democracy, republic, representative democracy, and Republican form of government interchangeably, although they are not the same things. Whatever the terms used, remember that in a democracy, the people are sovereign. They are the only source of any and all of government's power. In other words, the people rule. Dictatorship is probably the oldest, and it is certainly the most common, form of government known to history. A dictatorship exists where those who rule cannot be held responsible to the will of the people. The government is not accountable for its policies, nor for how they are carried out. Dictatorships are sometimes identified as either autocracies or oligarchies. An autocracy is government in which a single person holds unlimited political power. An oligarchy is government in which the power to rule is held by a small, usually self-appointed elite. All dictatorships are authoritarian. Those in power hold absolute and unchangeable authority over the people. Modern dictatorships have tended to be totalitarian as well. That is, they exercise complete power over nearly every aspect of human affairs. Their power embraces all matters of human concern. The leading examples of dictatorship in the modern era have been those in fascist Italy from 1922 to 1943, in Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945, in the Soviet Union from 1917 until the late 1980s, and one that still exists in the People's Republic of China. Although they do exist, one-person dictatorships are not at all common today. Typically, dictatorial regimes are militaristic in character. They usually gain power by force. The military holds many of the major posts in government. After crushing all effective opposition at home, these regimes may turn to foreign aggression to enhance the country's military power and prestige. Systems of government. In every system of government, the power to govern is located in one or more places geographically. From this standpoint, three basic forms of government exist: unitary, federal, and confederate governments. A unitary government is often described as a centralized government. All powers held by the government belong to a single central agency. The central or national government creates local units of government for its own convenience. Those local governments have only those powers that the central government chooses to give to them. Most governments in the world are unitary in form. Great Britain is a classic illustration. A single central organization, the Parliament, holds all of the government's powers. Local government exists solely to relieve Parliament of burdens it could perform only with difficulty and inconvenience. Though unlikely, Parliament could do away with these and other agencies of local government at any time. Be careful not to confuse the unitary form of government with a dictatorship. In the unitary form, all the powers held by the government are concentrated in the central government. That government might not have all power, however. In Great Britain, for example, the powers held by the government are limited. British government is unitary and at the same time democratic. A federal government is one in which the powers of government are divided between the central government and several local governments. An authority superior to both the central and local government makes this division of powers on a geographic basis, and that division cannot be changed by either the local or national level acting alone. Both levels of government act directly on the people through their own sets of laws, officials, and agencies. In the United States, for example, the national government has certain powers and the 50 states have others. This division of powers is set out in the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution stands above both levels of government, and it cannot be changed unless the people, acting through both the national government and the states, agree to that change. Australia, Canada, Mexico, Switzerland, Germany, India, and some other 20 states also have federal forms of government today. In the United States, the phrase the federal government is often used to identify the national government, the government headquartered in Washington, D.C. Note, however, that each of the 50 state governments in this country is unitary, not federal in form. A confederation is an alliance of independent states. A central organization, the Confederate government, only handles those matters that member states assign to it. Typically, Confederate governments hold limited powers in such fields as defense and foreign commerce. Most often, they have not had the power to make laws that apply directly to individuals, at least not without some further action by the member states. A Confederate structure makes it possible for the several states to cooperate in matters of common concern and also retain their separate identities. Confederations are very rare in the world today. The European Union is the closest approach to a confederation today. Through its institutions, the EU has established free trade among its 15 members, launched a common currency, and is moving towards the close coordination of its members' foreign and defense policies. In our own history, the United States under the Articles of Confederation from 1781 to 1789 and the Confederate States of America 1861 to 1865 are also examples of this form of government. Presidential and parliamentary forms of government. Political scientists also classify governments based on the relationship between their legislative and executive agencies. This view yields two basic forms of government, presidential and parliamentarian. In a presidential government, the executive and legislative branches of the government are separate, independent of one another, and co-equal. The chief executive, or president, is chosen independently of the legislature, holds office for a fixed term, and has broad powers not subject to the direct control of the legislative branch. The two branches regularly have several powers with which each can block actions by the other branch. Usually, as in the United States, a written constitution provides for the separation of powers between the branches. The United States is the world's leading example of presidential government. In fact, the United States invented the form. Most of the other presidential systems in the world are also found in the Western Hemisphere. In parliamentary government, the executive is made up of the prime minister or premier and that official's cabinet. The prime minister and the cabinet themselves are members of the legislative branch, the parliament. The prime minister is the leader of the majority party or of a like-minded group of parties in parliament and is chosen by that body. With parliament's approval, the prime minister selects the members of the cabinet from among the members of parliament. The executive is thus chosen by the legislature, is a part of it, and is subject to its direct control. The prime minister and the cabinet remain in office only as long as they have the confidence of the majority in parliament. If the parliament defeats the prime minister and cabinet on an important matter, the government may receive a vote of no confidence, and the prime minister and his cabinet must resign from office. Then a new government must be formed. A parliamentary government avoids prolonged conflict and sometimes deadlock between the executive and the legislative branches. On the other hand, the checks and balances of presidential government are not a part of the parliamentary system. Nevertheless, the British, Canadian, Japanese, and a majority of all of the other governments in the today's world have a parliamentary government.